Everybody, so welcome back to another episode of Colton Posey Fishing. So today we're going to be doing something a little bit completely different, I guess you could say. So I'm going to be doing a lake breakdown, but I'm going to be doing it kind of in the sense of, hey, we're transitioning from winter into the pre-spawn. And one of the biggest questions that I get this time of year is, where do these fish go? What are they doing? And why are they doing it? So either way, I'm going to break all that down on my own home lake. So stay tuned. This is something you don't want to miss. All right, so first off, if you like this kind of content, make sure to give me a thumbs up. It helps me out a whole lot. Subscribe. I got you covered when it comes to anything bass fishing. If you ever have any questions, comment down below, or if you just want to talk bass fishing. So let's go ahead and jump into it. So one of the first things I want to talk about is, where do these fish stay during the winter? And it's pretty much like this all across the country, right? I mean, they're typically going to be on these main lake areas. Now, with this being said, with everything being said, I'm not a very high tech person, but I've kind of got this figured out a little bit. I don't know how to draw or do any of that stuff. So the little hand in the middle that's moving around right here, that's what I'm going to be using to kind of direct you on what I'm talking about. So either case, this main lake point right here, this is typically going to be an area where these fish typically like to stay during the winter, and they're going to be all around it. They're going to be on top of it when they're feeding. They're going to be suspended off chasing bait fish or just resting, whatever the case may be. And sometimes they'll just suspend out here in the middle of nothing, doing absolutely nothing. Moving forward, getting into the bread and butter, I guess you could say, of what these fish are typically going to do is they're going to go into that mindset from food to reproduction. And this in particular is a spotted bass fishery. There is largemouth in it, but this will kind of apply no matter wherever you go. Okay, so whether it's a small reservoir, home lake, river system, whatever the case may be, creek, it doesn't really matter. It's kind of going to all pertain to the same concept. So when you're looking on your graph, I guess you could say, just in your boat and you're looking at your charts, this point right here is typically going to be an area right off the main lake that it's a long point sticking out. There is always going to be fish here, period. But these fish that are going to migrate and decide that they're going to spawn, they're typically not going to go, 6-7 miles up the lake. They're going to go into these pockets close to where they are. So let's just zoom in right here, and let's say these fish are living in this area. And I'm just saying, in a general area, they're going to typically be living anywhere in this area in particular that I'm circling with my mouse. Now, what they will typically do as soon as those water temps start warming up, especially above 55, 50, I'd say anywhere between 55 to 58 degrees, these fish are typically going to come up from the depths. And in this particular lake, like today, I saw some fish around 80 foot deep. Okay. Those fish, that water temperature in this lake, because it's so deep at like 50 to 55 feet, that temperature just stays like pretty much the same year round. So once the surface temp starts to get about the same as that, deep temp, I'm just going to use that as a reference, deep temp. As soon as it starts getting about the same, those fish will actually start moving up and getting shallower and shallower and shallower, getting ready for the spawn. And the shad will do the same thing. So the bass is going to follow those bait fish up. Now, once these fish get up shallow, they're typically going to be following these contours, okay? If you've been part of my channel for a long time, you've heard me refer to the contours, these steep contours right here that I'm moving my mouse on, as highways. And you want to treat them as a highway. And they're going to move up on these highways, and they're going to follow it to areas like this little secondary point right here. They may follow it on around and get on this other secondary point. And a lot of times what happens to us, we go on days where cold fronts are come through, or you get a lot of rain or whatever. But in this case, we're going to be talking about a cold front, okay? So let's just say, you've had several nice days and the fish are living in this general area or this general area or this general area. And all of a sudden, a cold front comes through. You go back and you fish those areas, and it's like no matter what you do, you can't get a bite or you can't find the fish. Well, typically, they're going to push it to one or two places. They're going to move out into this open area where there's nothing and suspend. And this is kind of like a theory that I've always thought that they did. But when I got forward facing sonar, I finally realized like they actually do that. It's just with 2D sonar, sometimes it's really hard to find them, especially when you have a huge expanse of water to cover, because you have to, you're trying not to backtrack and you make sure you're right on the right path. And if you're off just a little bit or something like that, you may miss something. But with the new technology, I've been able to confirm that a lot of these fish, they do move out here in this open water where there's nothing, and they'll just suspend. Now, with that being said, a lot of times these fish will actually push up in these ditches, okay? Now, this is what we call a ditch. It's basically like, just picture it like a ditch on the side of the road, okay? It's like a drain where, water runs through and stuff like that. It's like an old creek, okay? And these fish will actually push up in these areas and they'll suspend, do the same thing, feed on bait fish, all that good stuff, and just hang out in those typical areas. And they can stay in that ditch all day, first part of the morning. They may get back in there later in the evening. It just kind of depends on the weather and what's going on in the lake. Now, why do they do this? Why are they moving to these areas and stuff like that? Because they're getting close to their spawning pockets where they're going to spawn. Like this right here, some of these fish that live right here, there may be a population of 60 fish that live in this general area right here. Some of them may live right here, some of them may live out here, some of them may live on the tip of the point, and then a population of fish that kind of stay shallow all the time. Well, they'll move to these areas and stage up to get ready to make beds in these pockets or in the backs of these little creeks and stuff. Now, I will say, like right here, I know this part of the lake very, very well. There's a nice creek that runs into the back of this pocket. They're typically not going to spawn like right in the very back of that, simply because during the spring we get a lot of rain. We get a lot of rain. You'll have like 3 or 4 days is just rain, 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 and then you go to the lake and there's just every one of the run-ins is just gushing with water. Now, when this happened, or well, we'll move on to that here in just a minute. But in either case, they're not going to spawn right there simply because if they drop eggs right here and then all that water starts rushing in and creating current and stirring up the bottom and stuff like that, it's just going to push their eggs away. They're not going to be able to reproduce, and these fish seem to know that. So I'm typically not going to focus on like an area like this unless it rains really hard. Now let's move to another creek that's not far from here, and it's got another big run in that runs in right here. Now this creek where it runs in back here in the very back, now this is kind of going to come into play on those days where we have a lot of rains, right? So we get a lot of rain come in or something like that where you may be fishing the typical areas and you're not getting bit, but you had a lot of rain come in. This is typically a time where, if you watched my Facebook Live a couple years ago, when I was up on Lewis Smith, that's how I caught 90% of those big fish, the spotted bass and the big largemouth. I caught like a 7-pound largemouth under a dock. I think it was actually this dock. It was closer up in this area, somewhere in that area. But either way, they will typically push to the very, very back here where that water's coming in. And typically what I try to do, I try to stay a long ways off of it. I'm just going to say a long ways, but just for reference, like where this dock is right here, I would typically put my boat right here and make a cast all the way to the back where this creek is, and then bring my bait through there. And I typically do this with swim baits, with flukes, anything that I can use that I can keep directly off bottom or put on bottom if I need to. But it kind of depends on the run-in situation. Like if I'm in an area that's got a lot of laydowns or something in the middle of that creek channel, then obviously I want to go to something that's not going to get hung up as easy, and something with a little bit more power where, maybe instead of running 8-pound fluorocarbon and a small swim bait, I'm going to throw something like a chatterbait with 50-pound braid. That way I can get those fish out of those areas. But that's one thing that they love to do. They'll push to the backs of those creeks. And why? That's one of the biggest questions we need to ask, is why? And that's because most of the bait fish are going to migrate back there. But that is their food source, so they're going to, follow their food source, especially until they get ready to spawn. Now, same concept here. Okay, we've got a pretty decent sized long creek arm, and most of these fish are going to hang out on these points and stuff during the winter, the summer and stuff like that. They're going to be moving up and down chasing these bait fish and blueback herring that live in this lake. But a lot of times what these fish will do is two different things. When they go to migrate towards the back of this creek, they will either, one, follow the contour, the highway, or they will actually get in the center of this creek channel because there's a lot of standing timber, and they will go through that timber making their way back. And sometimes they will stage in like right in the middle right here, and then as soon as we get those warm spells or something like that, they'll push up on this little point or push up on this little point. This right here is a great area where I've caught tons of fish just because of that, sudden drop. It's a super subtle thing to miss, but that little sharp contour right there, these fish a lot of times will hang out right here and then transition up here when they're ready to feed, or move right back out here to where the standing timber and stuff like that is. So, they're going to be staying in this generalized area. So anytime you're fishing a creek, that's the reason I say picture it as the main lake. Where could these fish go? Well, I know they're not all the way back out here, right? Because I come from out here and I've been fishing out here and nothing's happening. I'm not seeing any fish. And that's what happens to me a lot of times. I will typically 99% of the time start on the main lake just to see if I see anything, just to see if I see any changes or anything like that, and it kind of tells me what I need to do the rest of the day. But I may move back, may get some rain. Okay, we'll just say we got some rain, and I start idling back here. And as I'm going through the middle of the channel, I'm seeing some fish out in the middle, and then I get to the back and I fish the very back. So I kind of covered up here and nothing happened. Just got a little bit of rain, so a little bit of water's coming in. I fish back here, nothing's really happening. So now I can put the puzzle pieces together and say, okay, the fish should be in this generalized area right here. So I need to pick apart this area and just see if I get any sign of life or any thing that tells me, hey, the fish are active in this area. Now we're going to move on to something a little bit different. We're going to go way over here to a creek that we call Lick Creek, and it's a super long creek. I mean, it's a super long creek. That's one of the things about this lake. There's tons of these super long creeks. And we're going to start at the mouth and kind of talk about that. Now, at the mouth, we've got a couple different things going on here, okay? We've got, some of these points that stick out with flats on it, same right here. And then, we've got some more points right here, pockets, a lot of docks. It doesn't show all the docks. There's tons of docks all the way down this creek. Now, we also have a channel swing, okay, a steep channel swing. Now, this is another area that you can treat as just this huge highway, okay? These fish that live right here may move all the way along this channel bend right here, because you got to think of it like this. If they're moving down this and a cold front comes through, then all they've got to do, because the surface temperature is going to drop some and the water is going to get unstable closer to the surface, they're just going to go deeper. That's it. They're in the same area. They're just going to go deeper, okay? And you need to target that zone. But one of the biggest things is, too, since we're talking about staging areas, let's say these fish are traveling through here and then we have a little front come through. Look at this. We've got a dock right here and a dock right here, over 56, 81 foot of water, probably deeper, just a little bit further out here. And some of these fish may spawn in this little pocket right here. That super simple, small little pocket. They could spawn like right there on that little northern pocket. Any little thing like that. Now, as you go further down, we've got this point right here in the middle of this creek. This is a well-known point. Everybody fishes it on this lake. Anytime you go to the lake and you roll up here, either you're going to be there, somebody's already been there, or somebody's going to be there after you leave. Just kind of as a reference, like this point that's here in this creek, these fish that live right here they're not going to spawn right here. Typically, they're not going to spawn. Now, in some spotted bass fisheries like Lewis Smith Lake, there is spotted bass who it's like an inconvenience for them to spawn. They just don't want to spawn. All they want to do is chase bait the entire time. So when that comes into play, some of those fish are still going to be there, just year round. They'll move up on that point, they'll drop their eggs, and they'll move right back out and start chasing bait. But it's few and far between. There's not a whole lot of fish that do that, but there is some that do that. But the majority of the fish that's going to migrate and spawn, they're going to go one or two areas. They're either going to go further back in the creek, or either they're going to go further up towards the main lake. Most of them are probably going to go a little bit closer to the back, not all the way to the back. But what I mean by this, I'm going to give you an example. We've got this point that comes out right here. These fish that live on that point, there's several places right here in this general area that they could go to spawn. Number one is this right here, okay? So we've got this super flat area, probably hard bottom, just because there's not a whole lot of contour change or anything like that. And then, right here, same thing, same scenario. I do know this part really well. There's a lot of fish that live right here, and there is a lot of fish that spawn in the backs of these pockets. There's some laydowns and stuff like that for these fish to spawn on. There's hard bottom, so it's easy for them to make beds, get those areas cleaned out. But, either way, when you go out on the lake right now, or you go out on your river system and you sit there and you say, okay, I know fish live here on that point. I know fish live on that point. Where are they going to start migrating to? Just start following those contours to those areas, those little secondary points, the mouths of these pockets, the ditch of the pocket. So, like going back up in here, right here in this deeper water, a lot of times these fish will just hang out right here until they get ready. And, it's simple. It sounds really simple, but sometimes the fish just don't want to cooperate, whether it's cold fronts coming through or, you get a lot of rain. It really, really muddies up the lake. And that's one thing we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about a shallow reservoir that gets super muddy. Now, talking about a shallow reservoir that gets muddy, I'm just going to use this for an example because the back of Lick Creek here is shallow, a lot of clay. It gets muddy super easy. So I'm going to just use this as a reference. Okay. So, maybe your lake set up like this where 15, 20, 25 foot's the deepest water you have. Okay. So, and we're just going to kind of cut it off right here. Okay. We're just going to say from where this 5 is all the way over is, that's where the lake starts. And then back here is where the lake ends. Okay. So with that being said, we put our boat in here and then we get to looking around. It's just a narrow lake, a couple creek arms and stuff like that. Treat it as if it is a big lake. Okay. So, we've got this flat right here. That's something that's off. We got a line of docks right here. So, during the summer, that's probably typically where these fish are going to live. Summer, winter is in that 15 foot. Right here, we've got some 14-foot water where the creek swings up against it right here with some docks. So we know there's probably going to be some fish living in this area, okay, where these fish go to spawn. So they may just swim up to this area and then come straight across, get right up in these little pockets right here and spawn. But where would they stage? More than likely right here in this area, because we've got that steep contour that drops off into deep water for those drastic temperature changes. Now, let's say you get a lot of rain and it just muddies up really, really bad. Then I'm going to look for areas like, well, I don't have the Google Maps or whatever to pull up. But either way, let's just say there's some timber, okay, or just lay downs, anything. Even these docks, okay, is a great example. These fish a lot of times can push right up against that stuff. The docks, the lay downs, all that stuff. That's where throwing like that river rat spinnerbait, that square bill crankbait and stuff like that comes into play. You can really, really target those fish, but you may have to make several casts to that area to get that fish to bite. But, if there was, a point that sticks out right here or a point that sticks out right here, we've got a little bit of a contour change. I wouldn't exactly rule this spot right here out. But I would think they would be mainly in that little bit deeper water. Just focus on areas like that, little subtle changes that's going to be close to those spawning areas. It doesn't have to be like right here. I don't mean like that close. If they're going to spawn right here, I'm not going to say, I would focus on this area right here. But, something that they can make a short swim. This is a 5-minute swim, and they're right there ready to make some beds. So, hanging out in this area close, it may even be this area right here. They could just be hanging out right in this general area, waiting to push back up in here and spawn. Now, with this being said, like I said, once again, make sure there's not a huge, creek coming in, right here, because obviously you get a lot of rain, it'll wash their eggs out, so they're typically not going to spawn right there in that area. But either way, guys, if the video helps you at all, make sure to like the video. It helps me out a ton. Subscribe. I got you covered when it comes to anything bass fishing. Also, comment down below if you have any questions or you just want to talk bass fishing. I love hearing from you guys, and I'll see you next time.